1. Race officer speaking. Pressure coming here, pressure coming.
We're 1.5 below.
2 dives here, boys. We're looking at 10.5 to 42.
Hello, my dear podcast listeners. Thanks again for joining us. We hope you all listened to part 1 of Ben's podcast, and I've come back for more. This time, we are delving deep into Ben's experiences competing for the oldest trophy in world sport, that elusive America's Cup. If you haven't listened to part 1, maybe scroll back and give it a go first. It's full of anecdotes from Ben's Olympic journey, his epic showdowns with Brazilians Robert Scheid and the laser, and his intense battle to win gold at London 2012, his home games. A feat he's adamant was his toughest Olympic win of all time. As I said at the start of part 1, the day we recorded the pod with Ben was an exciting one. We met him at the America's Cup team base, and for the first time in months, the team were preparing for a day on the water. Like many of us, the sailing team at INEOS Team UK have been in lockdown, and during that time, the boat has been transported back from its winter base in Sardinia. It's been months since we've seen the imposing, almost shadow-like outline of the AC-75 flying around the Solent. But Ben and the team were all readying for their first foray out onto home waters for quite some time. So it was heartening to see. Big thanks must go to Ben himself before we get underway. Sitting down for over 2 hours to record the podcast at such a busy time, it's much appreciated. And the results, well, he's had an incredible career. There's so much we could have talked about, but in this edition, we're all about the Cup, how he first got involved, what it was like winning it, and of course, how things are shaping up as racing in Auckland draws ever nearer. I hope you enjoy part 2 of the time I spent with Sir Ben Ainslie.
I remember Russell's phone going off. It was pretty obvious it was Larry, and he wasn't too happy about what he was seeing, you know. Probably a bit more of an instinctive sailor, so I do random things. He was sat having dinner with Stanley McChrystal and Condoleezza Rice, and I sat down, started talking about the America's Cup.
So far, Ben, we've been all about the Olympics. There's been a lot more to your sailing than that, of course. Match racing, big boat sailing, but we do have some time constraints, so we're going to turn to the Cup now. And I'm guessing that after that display of ruthless boat handling and tactics you put on at the Games in Sydney, that the phone started ringing. What was your first America's Cup experience?
Yeah, that's right. Actually, Peter Gilmour, who was then, I think, #1 match racer in the world, well, certainly up there with Russell Coote, had been asked to put together a US team for Seattle Yacht Club, owned by a guy called Craig McCaw, who was Nextel. And this was just before the dot-com bubble burst in 2000. And so I spoke, and Peter came to, actually I was in Sydney, he was there, I went to see him even before the Games, and we chatted about getting involved. They were putting this team together, and some of the best names in American sailing, the McKee brothers, Morgan Larson, Kevin Hall, some really, really good, talented guys like that. Laurie Davidson, who was a designer for Team New Zealand in '95. So again, some real top designers, had the financial backing, also had some of the key sailors from Team New Zealand, guys like Rick Dodson, Andrew Taylor, Jeremy Scantlebury. So yeah, a real top team. So I thought, yeah, this is a great opportunity to get involved at the highest level and learn, you know, from the top guys in the game. It was a bit of a tricky decision because Peter Harrison, quite late in the game, came in and put in his challenge, GBR challenge. And I remember having a period of sort of trying to umming and ahhing about whether to go with the British team, or which was going to be a first time at it, which was always tough, or going with a team with lots of experienced people who'd won the Cup and had designers who'd won the Cup. So I ended up going with Peter Gilmour, who was a great guy. I did quite a lot of match racing with Peter as his sort of main sheet hand stroke tactician, and we had a great time. But the team itself It was quite a tough experience because, I was only 21, 22 when I went there. I, spent my life in single-handers. As we talked about, I was pretty shy when I was younger. And I didn't really have, other than Peter, who was busy running the team, didn't really have necessarily any support. I wasn't going there with any mates or anything like that. And actually I remember Jimmy and a lot of his guys, so Joey Newton, Ben Durham, Andy Feathers, they came in about the same time that I joined, and that was great because they were a similar age and really good lads, good Aussie bunch. And so that I enjoyed that, but at the same time, I couldn't really see a pathway to, how I fitted in terms of what my role was. And Peter was always quite keen, and I did lots of different jobs on the boat, which was great. So I went up the mast, I did the runners, I did some trimming, did a little bit of helming. But I was kind of doing lots of different jobs, not really focusing on anything. And so I could kind of see a point. I didn't really know how I was going to actually get to do any racing. And I remember one day we were out training and doing some training racing. And we trawled the spinnaker, and I was doing tactics. And so I ran forwards in the boat to try and help retrieve the spinnaker. I remember, I won't say his name because it's not really fair, but one of the older experienced guys, and he just lost it at me because he's like, you never leave your position. What are you doing up here? You never. And I was like, well, yeah, mate, if you hadn't noticed, we're trawling the spinnaker. So unless we can get that out of the water, we're not going anywhere anyway. And I just kind of thought, I don't really need this. And I don't know, just something snapped, and I just thought I don't really want to do this anymore. So it was a really difficult decision because, like I said, I was only young, and I kind of really, really experienced top guys in the America's Cup game. And I realised I was going to take a bit of a hit. My reputation was going to take a bit of a hit as a team player and someone that you'd look to for the America's Cup. But at the same time, I just felt like it wasn't really where I wanted to be. And so I left the team. I remember Peter saying to me, well, that's okay, you can do that, but you're going to have to stand up in front of everyone and explain to them why you're leaving, which was a complete hospital pass. And I still don't, I'd get on really well with Peter, and if we don't have any problems at all, but I'm not quite sure why I did that, because I remember, certainly if in my position I'm in now, I'd never ask some youngster to go and do that, because it's, especially in front of all these sort of legends of the America's Cup. So I felt like a complete idiot when I had to stand up in front of them and tell them why I was leaving. But they were, they're much more experienced. They've seen plenty of people come and go in the sport, and they were all very nice about it. And they went on, did okay. They had some issues with funding when the tech bubble burst, and unfortunately Craig McCall lost a lot of money, and that was all tied up with the funding of the team. But they got to the semis, and I think lost eventually to Alinghi or Oracle, I can't remember which. And that was that campaign. So I kind of learnt a lot as a sticking sort of nose into the America's Cup world. But it was ultimately it was a disappointing end. I really didn't like leaving a team like that. I really struggled with the decision, but it came to the point where I just felt I had to get out of it and get back to doing something which I knew a bit better, which was Olympic sailing, and then that got me into the fin, which was a great move.
Did it put you off the America's Cup? I mean, did you leave thinking, yeah, I still want to be involved in this, but just not in this scenario? Yeah. or did you think that you had to be involved to be taken seriously?
Yeah, it was frustrating because as a kid, I said earlier, I grew up in Cornwall. I remember as I was maybe about 10 years old, I was sailing around in my Optimus with some mates, and Peter de Savary had his America's Cup team then, and he had some 12 metres, and they were out there training. And I remember watching these 12 metres from a distance and just thinking, those boats look amazing. And I just really want to be involved with that somehow in the future, the America's Cup. And then I started watching it on telly and so on, and really, really got into it and watched the 95 Cup, 92, 93, and then 95. And Team New Zealand obviously winning, dominating in 95. And that massive, massive sort of desire, ambition to be involved with the Cup and try and win the Cup for Britain, or just win the Cup full stop, but ideally to win it for Britain. And so, yeah, I was really frustrated because my first experience had been ultimately not been good. And as I'd said, I was kind of worried that I kind of ruined my reputation in professional sailing, because you don't walk out of a team like that, really. You know, it's pretty hard to get back in once you've done that. So yeah, it was a big decision. And anyway, I got out of it, went into the Finn, had a great time with the Finn. And then Grant Dalton emailed me in 2001. No, sorry, not 2001, 2003, just after the Kiwis had lost Uelingi, and he'd been charged with putting Team New Zealand back together. And, you know, so he came and we met. Actually, I was doing the World Championships in Cadiz in the Finn, 2003, and he came over to Cadiz and we met, and just instantly got on really well, because anyone who knows Daltz, he's a complete straight shooter, and I like that in people. I can't, you know, people who sort of, you know, aren't really direct and, you know, say one thing and mean something else. I always find that a bit of a struggle. So we had a great conversation. You know, he talked about how he wanted to rebuild the team, you know, still around Dean and the core guys and some of the designers that he was talking about bringing in. And it just sounded, you know, obviously the reputation of Team New Zealand is huge in sailing. And so again, I thought, well, it's a great opportunity to get involved and try and do a bit better than the last campaign and learn more about professional sailing in the America's Cup. And I kind of liked Grant Dalton, so I thought I'll do it. And then did the games in Athens, then went straight to Valencia, where they had the first act, as they called them, which was both match racing and fleet racing in the version 5 boats. And my role was as a strategist, and Terry Hutchinson was a tactician, Dean was a helmsman. And we actually did really well in the event. I think we won the match racing, or we were second in the match racing. Well, you know, either first or second in the fleet racing and the match racing. But it was just kind of clear that strategist role wasn't really the right role for me, and with the personalities that were there, it just wasn't really going to fit. So rather than do 3 years getting frustrated, I had a chat with Grant and said, I think, sorry, but it's probably not going to work. But you've got 2 boats. There's an option there that you need a second helmsman, a backup for Dean if something he gets injured, and also for the in-house racing to build that up and have intense in-house racing. And so thankfully he said, yeah, look, I think that's great. You know, take that on. And for me, it was great because I wanted to learn how to match race. I hadn't really done much of that, and also to steer those bigger boats. And so yeah, it was a fantastic team. Some really great people in that team. You know, one thing with Grant Dalton is, for the budget that he has, he does an amazing job of getting bang for buck. And you know, it was a really solid campaign, seriously close to winning it. Lingy are amazing team. Okay, didn't have Russell anymore, but still an amazing team with Brad and the guys. It was frustrating not racing. That was a frustrating period, but you know, the build up to that, the ability to learn how to match race, to be with a top team. Yeah, I learned a huge amount through that. And then that led into to Team Origin with Keith.
You've obviously sailed against Dean on many occasions. You had a bit of a coming together, didn't you, with Team Japan in Bermuda in the last Cup. He's helming the America's boat in this approaching Cup.
Yeah.
What did you learn about Dean in your time with Team New Zealand?
Well, he's a phenomenally good match racer. Technically, I think Dean and Jimmy technically at that period, you know, I mean, match racing's changed a lot now. The whole game's completely changed, but then they were the best technically. Very, very hard in terms of all the set moves. Very hard to sort of get them out of their rhythm. And that was really the only way. And they had great teams around them, so fast, and had all of the set plays worked out after, you know, they both sort of grew up match racing. So it was sort of ingrained in them. So for me, it was a lot of time. It took a long time to learn those plays and how that worked out. And then, you know, I'm probably a bit more of an instinctive sailor. So I do random things, which sometimes work, but more often not than the set play, which those guys have worked out after years and years of doing it. So great learning opportunity to go up against Dean, you know, day in, day out. and learn that match racing game, and it, and get reasonably good at it. In the end, it took a while. But Dean, technically very good. Great. I think great with the team. Quite quiet. Sort of leading by example, really. I think. But yeah, it's pretty solid as a sailor. Yeah.
It's hard, the Cup, isn't it, in many ways? I mean, you're British, you want to fly the flag, but you want to compete with a team that has a real chance of achieving something. But by 2010, you joined Sir Keith Mills, a huge investor in our sport. I mean, a man with a reputation for getting things done. He'd set up Team Origin. There was plenty of talent involved. You joined as skipper, and finally, you're with a British Cup team. Was there a thought early on that the team could be competitive? And what happened to the team?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of hope that it could be a competitive team. We had some great sailors, Percy and Bart, Cat Flap, great mate of mine, and some good sort of Antipodean additions, bringing in some good experience. And actually, the last race we did was out here, the 1851 Cup, in the version 5 boats, where we did some exhibition match racing against Oracle, Jimmy and the guys of Oracle, and we had Simon Daubney, Warwick Fleury, Rodney Ardern, we had Matt Mitchell helping Cat Flap on the bow, and we had a fantastic series. We really took it to them and had some great. I think anyone who did that series just loved it because the boats were quite old by that stage, and they've changed Rule 17. So actually, if you got an overlap from behind, you could just luff someone straight away. So we're just ripping around the Solent, luffing each other head to wind with the spinnakers up, and just causing all sorts of carnage, but having some great racing. And we ended up winning out the series. And so, yeah, it was a shame that then they had the deed of gift race with Alinghi. That took couple of years to go through the courts and then build the boats and have the race. I think a lot of people in the America's Cup world were massively frustrated by all of that, because it then been between, so you had a hiatus of 6 years or so between cups, which, my generation of sailors, that's 6 years of your career really. Unless you were in one of those two teams, you weren't competing. So that was a really frustrating period. And again, you just think to sport, overall, it's frustrating that things like that can happen, and surely we can do a better job to try and get the right leadership in sailing to avoid things like that happening. But anyway, that was the situation, and unfortunately, Keith, quite understandably, looked at what it was costing, what it was going to cost to keep going, and it just wasn't the right thing. So that was a real shame, because we had a great team. We got Grant, Mike Sanderson was involved at the beginning, and then Grant Simmer came in. And we had some great designers, good solid squad. So I think there was a lot of potential in that, but unfortunately we never got to see it to fruition.
Must have been quite frustrating for you, because finally you feel like you're sort of getting there.
It was. We felt, and I worked a lot with Keith really closely on putting the team together and getting the right people involved. He was great, Keith, and it was a really sad moment. Again, quite a pivotal moment though, because at that point I was working really hard on the team, and I didn't really see a way I could do both that and the Olympics 2012. So actually, in bringing it close to that, Keith sort of inadvertently then opened the Olympic avenue back up for me.
One of the most talked about subjects on this podcast is, of course, San Francisco 2013. Yeah. I've yet to interview anyone from the New Zealand boat for the pod. We'll get there. But we have spoken to...
Yeah, I'm sure it's amazing how the story evolves as time goes by. Yeah. It would be great to get some Kiwi aspect to it.
We'll definitely get to New Zealand. But we have spoken to Kyle Langford, Russell Coutts, and of course Jimmy Spittle, all from Oracle Team USA. The winning boat back at the 2013 Cup. They each have their own very specific stories to tell on how it all went down. But for you, Ben, again, you'd taken the position of B-boat skipper, so pushing Jimmy Spittle in the build-up to the Cup. And you then watched as the team lost race after race to the Kiwis. What were you thinking throughout the early stages of the Cup?
Well, you got to go back further through the campaign, and I know you talked in depth to many people about this, but it was a really bizarre cup, and I actually, looking ahead to this next cup, I see a lot of similarities in the way things are playing out. A new class of boat. I mean, the Oracle campaign was really not necessarily for anyone's fault, but it'd been a lot of setbacks. The boat capsized, got taken out with the ebb tide, broken up in San Francisco Bay, then had to rebuild that, try and get a second boat going. Then, obviously, horrendously had the Artemis crash. So it'd been a really, and then the sort of AC-45 measurement debacle. So it'd been kind of shambolic, really. And going into it, no one had really lined up against each other that much in the 72s. We knew the Kiwis had been going really well just by monitoring their performance and how they were handling and so on, and then how they performed through the Challenger Series. But at Oracle, we had our own set of problems, which was sort of talked about. And I'd come into the team quite late on the back of 2012 in a sort of similar role to the role that I did at Team New Zealand. And frankly, didn't do that much sailing because, as I said, we destroyed one boat, had to rebuild it, and then get the other boat out. So, and the amount of people and manpower, the manpower, logistics it took to operate two boats was really took a lot of time. And so we only sailed two boats, I don't know, probably 10, 15 times, something like that. So I hadn't really done a huge amount, to be honest. And then we got racing, knew the Kiwi was going to be tough. Straight out the block, the performance was similar-ish. They certainly had an edge early on, and the race, as you said, the racing was clearly going their way. There were a couple of close races in there, but they always seemed to squeak through, and then they seemed to have a slight speed edge. And then, I remember it must have been race 5, I suppose. We were watching, and we were, Jimmy, guys had a good start, were in the lead, we're leading around the bottom gate, and then, did this move, which actually, to be fair, tactically was the right thing to do, to get early, came around the right-hand gate and try and do a sort of foiling tack and get into the cone of Alcatraz, get the tidal relief. But for whatever reason, made a mess of the maneuver and kind of fell off the foils, then ended up being a slow tack. And the Kiwis just came round, ducked behind them, had loads more speed, and actually the next cross, I think we're ahead. And I remember I was in the boat with Russell and Grant, and I remember Russell's phone going off, and it kind of was a bit, it was slightly held off his ear, and it was pretty obvious it was Larry, and he wasn't too happy about what he was seeing, Like, oh God, what's going to happen now? And then he just turned around to me and he said, "Oh, you better get your wetsuit on." I was like, "What are you talking about?" He said, "I think we're going to have to do something." I said, "Look, I can't. Well, for a start, I haven't got my wetsuit with me, so that's not going to work. And secondly, like you don't need me to tell you, but and Russell's obviously a super experienced guy. Rightly decided that he needed to speak to Jimmy, and so as you sort of called a delay, and then Russell and Jimmy had a good chat about things, and I was sort of at the back of the boat, so thinking, well, I don't really know how this is going to play out, and I haven't looked at any of the tactical software or whatever. If they asked me to do that role, I'm not really sure how it's going to play out. Anyway, they made the right decision, which was to take a spare day, which you could, and go back to the base and regroup. And then eventually, after a while, I wasn't involved in the discussions, but they decided that they wanted to switch JK out and put me in the tactical role, which was tough. Obviously, really tough for JK. And the first thing I did was just phone him up and chat it through. And to be fair, he was amazing. His response was just brilliant. I think sort of true class and professionalism, which was, look, I'm disappointed, but I want the team to win, and I'll help you do whatever you need to do to run through all the software and so on. So we spent the next day, he helped me out a lot going through that and how it all worked, because I hadn't seen any of it. And we had a day's practice, but most importantly, and what really, I think most people will say changed the game for us, the designers did a really good job looking at how we could load up the wing more, get the center of effort lower and load up the foils. And we made that setup change, and that had a huge impact on the performance. Then we worked out, actually, we might be able to, we played around with foiling upwind in practice, but normally we could only get foiling momentarily, and then we screwed up the maneuver, so it kind of, the amount of gain line we chewed up by getting on the foil in the first place, we didn't normally get that back. So we kind of hadn't really played around with it enough in the build up to be confident that it would work. And so therefore we weren't using it in the racing. And then I think with this setup change, it just, like I said, loading up the foils more, it just powered the boat up. And we found we were able to get on the foil earlier and obviously have a lot of success with that. And that was a real game changer. And that was, great team effort really, with the designers looking at it, with the sailors, the shore crew working through the night to implement those changes, and then going out and learning the techniques of how to sail the boat. So it's a fascinating period because this is all in the middle of the event. So yeah, it was great. It's amazing to be a part of that and experience that.
Did you have any hesitation? I mean, how did you approach it?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, there was, a couple of people, good mate, Brad Butterworth, who's a really good mate over the years. And then mate, I mean, he's one of my sort of heroes, if you like, along with sort of people like Russell and Paul Elstrom and those kind of guys. I remember, and he's a kind of super smart guy, Brad, and sort of kind of has a sort of bit of a Machiavellian streak. I remember him saying to me, "Oh mate, you don't want to do this. This is just, you're just getting set up here for things don't work out. It's all going to be on you." And I could sort of see that argument, but at the same time, you've been asked to, the team, I'd only been with the team 12 months, but they're a really good group of guys. You're sort of asked to get in there and help, and you're going to say yes. And there was always a chance that, who knows, we might be able to turn this around. And somehow we did. But there was some amazing races in there, and some big moments. But I got on really well with Tom Slingsby, so he and I had a good relationship. Got on well with Jimmy. He did, I think in terms of just keeping the show on the road. He did an amazing job. And of course Russell and Grant and the designers and Tugboat and the shore team. Everyone sort of pulled together. It was an amazing outcome.
I mean, to the outside world, Jimmy was having to face the music, wasn't it? I mean, those press conferences, they're still good value now.
So I was sitting in there with him, and I mean, Jimmy's amazing. He can, I know him well, and knowing how he operates, but there's a lot of hype in there. But he's an interesting character because actually, when you get to know him well, he's very different from those press conferences and so on. He's very much, playing the game. And then you go and have a beer or a chat, whatever. He's a very different person. So, it was interesting observing how that all played out.
What was he like within the team at that time?
He was good. He was good. I mean, he's the kind of guy who leads by example. There's no one fitter. There's no one works harder. He's I think leads by example. And I think. In that moment, it was obviously, just getting sort of hammered by the press, things, not going at all well. You have to be a strong personality to be able to deal with that. So thankfully he was. I mean, there are other sailors I know, if they'd been in that position, would have just melted. But that Aussie larrikin in him saw it through, which is great.
Talking to Jimmy about that time, about needing to win 8 races on the bounce, he gives much credit to Carl Langford flying the wing, of course, and Tom Slingsby. But what do you think actually made the difference? How did that team go from 8-1 down, from your perspective, to lifting the cup?
Like I said, it was everything really. I mean, it was that. The biggest factor was the change in the setup to the boat, because we probably made it. I don't know, I haven't done the numbers exactly, but it would have been something crazy like 10, 15, 20% improvement upwind performance, which is huge. So that, I think, that then gave the sailing team more confidence. So we're sort of communicating better, making better decisions, and obviously the shore team did an incredible job to hold the thing together. And I know Jimmy talked about, breaking the control arm in the wing before the start of the final race, and again the guys jumping to it and patching things together. I mean, it was just so miraculous when you look back at all of the things that went wrong, really. And an incredible time. But great for the sport, because it really, I think, certainly put the America's Cup back on the map.
So there you are on the stage, all the confetti, the joyous celebrations of, let's face it, an utterly improbable comeback. And your hands are on the cup, lifting the trophy. I mean, no British team has managed it since we first lost it. And there you are, wearing the Stars and Stripes. How much did that moment solidify your resolve to do what you could to turn your back on Olympic sailing and focus on winning the cup back for Britain?
Yeah, like as I said, it's always been an ambition since I was really a young kid. And yeah, amazing to be part of that, to win the cup. We were all there on the stage and enjoying that moment. But there was definitely a part of me that felt, well, this is great. That's sort of one thing sort of ticked off the to-do list, if you like. But it'd be much better if this was, no disrespect. That was a great team, but next step is, can we do it with a British team? And so that's what I'd already been looking at with starting BAR. We'd been racing in the World Series. Russell had been really helpful in terms of trying to help me set that team up. And so we had done the groundwork, and then already talking to people like Keith, Charles Dunstan, Chris Bakes, and people like that who were passionate about sailing and wanted to support a UK effort. So on the back of the success of San Francisco, coming back home, I was amazed by the response, how many people it sort of had attracted. I had no idea, being in San Francisco, being relatively sort of hidden away, and coming home and, people saying, been watching sailing in the pub. I mean, no one watched football and rugby in the pub, they don't watch sailing. So clearly it sort of got some traction. And those, like I said, Keith, Charles, Chris were fantastic. Michael Grade, Robert Elliott came in and was sort of a core group of helping me get things going. But it was tough because we set ourselves a target, and Joe Grinley, who's helped me out on the commercial side for God knows how many years now, with the Olympics and then the Cup. So we set ourselves a target. We had to raise 25 million by the end of the year. So already then it was end of September. And so I was then on the road, financing road, going around. I was sponsored by JP Morgan for my Olympic campaign, so I was actually living in New York at the time with Georgie, and so I spent quite a lot of time with JP Morgan. I remember they had an event for some of their key leaders down in Key Biscayne, and going and meeting Jamie Dimon for the first time and trying to convince him to back a British team, just JP Morgan Chase, largest bank in the world, American bank, why on earth they're going to sponsor a British team for the America's Cup? So I went to meet Jamie, and he was sat having dinner with Stanley McChrystal and Condoleezza Rice. And I sat down, started talking about the America's Cup, which seemed completely outlandish, really, given the company he was in. And they'd had a bit to drink. And then he said, "Do you dance?" Which anyone who knows me knows I'm the worst dancer going. Horrendous, got zero rhythm. I said, "No, you really don't. I don't dance. I'm not dancing." He said, "Come on, you and me, let's dance." I was like, You don't want to do it. I'm not dancing." And bear in mind what I was asking him to contribute to the America's Cup. I kind of thought, well, if the guy wants to dance, the guy wants to dance. So I ended up dancing with Jamie Dimon, CEO of JP Morgan, just thinking, this is the most ridiculous scenario. What the hell am I doing here? And anyway, we did that, and he didn't back us.
Not after he'd seen you dancing.
Yeah, it must have been the dancing, yeah. So no, that was a fascinating period, putting that team together, and some, incredibly generous people, like Charles and Keith and Chris Bake, Irvin Laidlaw, Forget people here, Roy Bedlow, and John Wood, Peter Dubens, Ian Taylor. There's a great group that came together to back the team, and then we were able to go out and get the sponsors as well. So it was a lot to put together in a short period of time, and it felt a bit crazy trying to do that. But whilst we didn't win the cup last time, but I think we at least put down the foundations for a team to build for the future, which is what we're doing. We had designers in tears because the poor guys had been really up against it. And I remember sitting in an office in London with 5 lawyers thinking, what am I doing here? None of us were actually going to have lined up against one another properly in anger before we start racing.
I mean, such a different role for you as well. I mean, you're used to being almost, a hired gun in some ways, don't you, at the top of the talent tree. And now your name's above the door. You're in charge of so many aspects of the campaign. It's down to you. How did you react to, I guess, taking on all those different pressures?
Well, I mean, the best thing, Charles, he was a great sounding board. And the first thing he said to me is, like, running businesses, running teams, the first thing you got to work out is that you're going to be way better off hiring people that are better than you, whatever, the sailing, design, it's about getting the best possible people. So that, it's kind of obvious, but it is sound advice. And so the tricky thing was trying to find someone who could come in and take on a CEO role, because there'd been lots of examples in the cup of people trying to do everything. They're running the team, they're skippering the boat, they're steering the boat, they're kind of doing everything, and it's almost impossible. So biggest challenge was trying to find the right person to come in the CEO role. And I was going down one route, and then actually somebody introduced me to Martin Whitmarsh, and I went to see Martin up at his home in Woking and his wife Debs. And within about you just know, don't you, when you meet someone you think that's the right thing. So I knew within about 3 minutes that he was the kind of guy that we needed, because we had this vision of the cup, but also to try and build this business around the cup and the marine industry here on the south coast. And Martin, what he'd achieved with McLaren and McLaren Technologies, amazing opportunity to be able to get someone like that involved. So Martin came on board and did a brilliant job, really helping us build the team from scratch and set everything up as we did. It still is. It's a challenge, keeping that core focus as a sailor, alongside everything else that's going on in the team. But the secret is having the best people around you possibly can.
Looking back at that last campaign briefly, I mean, it's notoriously hard to win for a startup team, isn't it? But you got solid funding.
Yeah.
You had a great looking team set up, and on the surface, it all looked pretty good. With the benefit of hindsight, where did the team lose the last cup, do you think?
Well, we were never able to catch up on the technical front, and it's not only having the best people. We had some really great designers, smart people. Andy Clawton, huge amount of experience running the design team, and some great people also came in from Formula One. But that IP that you build up through campaigns, I mean, you look at Artemis, I think that was a great example as well. So struggled big time in the first campaign, but that IP that they'd learned, developed, they really put that to good use the second time around, and were many people's hot pick going into the cup itself. So that was where we really we struggled to catch up on the IP front, and we also got stuck in trying to test on the water too much. We had a good simulator. James Roach came across from McLaren, set up the simulator, and still running that and doing a great job for us. But we put too much focus on trying to test on the water rather than just back in the simulator and focusing on that and doing the development through that, which is pretty much what the Kiwis did. So that was probably our strategic error, if you like. And then just being able to, like I say, catch up on the design front. So going into it, we were massively on the back foot. I mean, it was embarrassing, really. Being in Bermuda, we couldn't even sail around the track in the practice races because our systems weren't efficient enough at that point. Our foils weren't, our development foils were were not good, but we made some amazing strides. You know, the final sets of all-round foils that we had were pretty good. Our designers were pretty clever with a few things we did with the rudders, and the systems got a lot better. So actually, by the point we got to the competition, I remember we raced against Artemis in the first race, and everyone had written us off, you know, and it was kind of annoying. You'd read some of the stuff, try not to read it. Every now you sort of read something with it, you know, everyone's just sort of writing you off and for it kind of thing. So anyway, we went the first race before the race against Artemis. We actually lined up with them, and you did a short practice in the morning, and then you went back, did the duck out, and then came out and raced. And in that practice, we actually lined up against them in about 10 knots of breeze. And for the first time ever that we sailed against anyone else in an F50 or AC50 as it was then, we actually were on the pace, you know. And I remember Giles was down to leeward looking at them and sort of calling the relatives. And he was kind of in disbelief, the fact that we were actually holding our own, or perhaps even gaining a little bit. And I think everyone else was pretty astonished as well. So we went into the race, we had a nice start, got ahead, and we kind of managed to hold our lead around the course. It was amazing. I mean, we had designers in tears because the poor guys had been really up against it. You know, they'd been taking a battering because we'd been off the pace, but actually, you know, we got ourselves somewhat on the pace. I mean, we had a window really of, I think, on our all-purpose boards, about 10 to 13, 14 knots, something like that, where we were kind of competitive. We struggled a bit, but we were kind of competitive. And so we won that race, and that was a huge boost for the team. And then, as you mentioned earlier, the second race, we had this issue. We came together with the Japanese. We just started using twist control on the wheel where I was flying the boat. And we'd only been using it for 2 or 3 days. Again, we were pretty late and behind the other teams on some of this stuff. And basically, we hadn't been able to fine tune it, so it was it's a bit like a throttle really. And as the Japanese came in to hook us, I put in more rake to lift the boat out of the water, but just, you know, the fact not being used to it, just put in way too much rake, and so the boat shot up out of the water and did this big sideways slide. And it's kind of a danger in those boats. It you know, happens quite a lot. And but obviously this wasn't a good time to do it. Land square on the Japanese, which I don't think any of them were particularly impressed by. I know Dean wasn't when I saw him afterwards. But yeah, I mean, it was my mistake, you know. So I sort of took it on the chin, apologised, but I don't think they were too happy about it.
Ben, you're used to being in scenarios where you can contend for a win. And here you are in Bermuda, you know, quite far out. As you say, you're on the back foot, you know, and it's your team, it's your reputation.
Yeah.
At home in the UK, it's been a massive deal. It's a huge publicity, you know, we're going to bring the cup home.
Yeah.
Personally for you at that time, you know, how hard was it all?
Yeah, it was the most difficult thing I've ever done because, I'm sort of put the team together, leading it. A lot of expectation. We'd won the World Series, so kind of in a way, whilst that was great from a sailing perspective, that just kind of heaped more expectation on the whole thing. And knowing before we even went that we were massively behind, you know, we probably weren't almost, you know, you never give up, but probably we weren't going to win it. And then trying to keep the team going, keep positive whilst things were clearly, you know, we were clearly off the pace was very, very difficult. And then the competition itself was frustrating. You know, I was really, I mean, I still said this a lot, I was really proud of the team that they held it together. Because at one point it really did like a bit of a lost cause, but they held it together. We made a lot of big gains and we were somewhat competitive. Okay, we lost to the Kiwis in the end, but you know, it wouldn't have taken too much to change there. They were clearly done a better job, were faster. But if you think about that capsize, we lost 2 races, our wing broke down, and you know, another few things going differently. We were sort of competitive, and like I said, I think the team stuck together and did a good job, all things considered.
I often wonder, Ben, I mean, at the time, am I right memory-wise that you had much of the commitment and funding in place for a 2-cup campaign? You're there, you're watching the cup itself unfold, and as we know, the winner writes the rules. So you must have had a preference as a sailor, as a team principal, as an owner of a team. What are you thinking back in Bermuda? Did you want a totally new AC class, as we've now seen, or did you want things to say similar to the AC50 class as it was? I mean, how did all that work out?
Yeah, so, we had put a lot of work into the framework agreement. Martin was actually quite instrumental in that with his similar experiences in Formula One. So he worked quite closely and well with Russell on that. And all of the teams, apart from the Kiwis, were behind that. And I was behind that because as a principal, I could see the costs were really high. Actually, if we could bring it back to a sort of format that was justifiable commercially, then you can start building something and build something for the long term. Stop, start, changing boats all the time. The high costs mean that it's really, really hard to grow the sport, certainly grow the America's Cup. So that was, as it became more and more clear that the Kiwis were probably going to win, that was obviously a disappointment. And obviously a disappointment that we hadn't been able to get ourselves, performing better, get further along the competition. But I mean, my thought process was, there's no way we can leave it like this. We've got to keep going. So I kind of not threw everyone on the bus, but I just thought, well, the only way to do that is to go out and tell everyone that we're doing it. And thankfully, the Land Rovers of this world and Keith and Charles and the other backers were kind of supportive and said, well, yeah, okay, I guess so. I guess we are doing it if you just told everyone we're doing it. So we didn't actually have anything committed, but they were amazing. They came in and we started talking about how we could rebuild the team. Land Rover re-signed, a lot of our sponsors re-signed to go again. Then we had to go through this process, of course, waiting for what the boat was going to be, what the Kiwis and the Italians had decided. And that took a while. To be fair, they turned things around about as quickly as you probably could, but it still took a good 6 to 8 months. And then once it was clear what the program was looking like, most importantly what the boat was looking like, then it was clear it was going to cost a lot more than we thought, and that our model was going to be a serious push to get the financing in place. And then for a mutual friend, I was introduced to Jim Ratcliffe, and we, it's been talked about in the press. We literally went and caught up in a club in London, had a couple of beers, and pretty much in the space of a couple of hours, he decided he was into it. He loves a challenge. Doesn't get any bigger than this, and passionate Brit, backing British sport. So he said he'd do it, but this became very difficult because it's INEOS. People say it's the biggest business you've never heard of until recently, and so part of that was this needs to be an INEOS team. We haven't got the space, unfortunately, for the other partners. And so that was a difficult period for me. Then putting this switch in the team around from, commercial backing and private investment to just one sole sponsor. But to everyone's credit who was involved, they all could see what needed to be done, how much it was going to cost, and I think in the end agreed that this was to give the team the best chance to be successful. This was the right move to make.
It can't have been easy. I mean, in the end with BAR, it felt like a real family, almost, on a mission. It was very British.
It was, and I had some amazing. So you probably remember a chap called Bill Reed, who's the head of mergers and acquisitions for INEOS. So I had to really negotiate with Bill how we were going to do this. And I remember at one point sitting in an office in London with 5 lawyers, thinking, what the hell am I doing? What am I doing here? And, life used to be so simple when I was sailing around in my laser on my own. But we did. I mean, we got there in the end. It was pretty tricky at times, but it was amazing insight into that world and doing deals and that sort of thing. And INEOS, is an amazing company. You know, Jim Ratcliffe himself's an amazing guy, but INEOS, its success in the corporate world, it's been a real eye opener seeing how they operate and the success that they've had.
How has that investment changed, you know, where you now focus your attention?
Well, it's and this was the big reason for making the switch was, you know, one backer, you're much more focused. So the other key part of this was on the back of Bermuda. Martin had done his bit, and he kind of wanted to move away, and you know, the amount of time and focus, it wasn't really the right thing for him, and also trying to bring in someone with an America's Cup track record. So getting Grant to come over was a big deal. That took a bit of convincing, but I managed to convince him in the end. So, you know, getting Grant helping restructure the team, then getting the financing in place, that's meant that we've been able to be much more focused and also set a strategy around knowing that we got a budget in place. Whereas last time we had a desired budget that we were kind of planning around, but we almost got there. We didn't quite get there. But, you know, trying to set a strategy around that's hard.
What does Grant Zimmer add to it all? Why him?
Grant, just bags of experience. You know, he's seen everything in the cup that's got to throw up in the last 30 odd years. He's, you know, been at the top of the game in every aspect, be that as a sailor or designer or a manager. So he gets the whole picture, and I think that's really helpful because, you know, you can go through certain decisions, and again, he gets it from every angle. And there aren't that many people who've got that big picture. So that's really Grant's expertise. And he and I have worked together for quite a long time now. So I've got a good relationship and good level of trust, which is kind of what you need.
Talk to us about the AC75. We spoke to your head of design, Nick Holroyd, for our Cup Design podcast a few months back.
Yeah.
So we know a lot about the boats themselves, but from the sailor's perspective, they can look a little intimidating. I mean, how much are you enjoying sailing the AC75? And how much is it really pushing the envelope?
Yeah, they're real beasts. You know, they're a bit like the AC72 in terms of the scale and the power, and the performance actually strikingly similar. You know, technically they're again a man-eater in terms of design time in hours and focus. They're a huge amount of fun to sail. I mean, pretty tricky to sail because obviously you've only got one rudder, and if you lose that, you're in all sorts of bother. So that's a challenge. And then, you know, there's certain elements that, you know, I think some people are for it. The double film mainsail, I think, frankly, is a bit of a waste of time. But that is what it is. Can't change that. You know, I think, like I said earlier, it's got a lot of similarities to 2013 and of course the AC72, and that none of us are actually going to have lined up against one another properly in anger before we start racing, in the Challenger series at least. So those teams that can react quickly and fast are that's what it's going to take, because there's going to be a huge amount of development at the last minute. So, I mean, we've got a great team here. I think we are well set up to do that, but, you know, I'm pretty certain that's what it's going to require. But yeah, they're a serious challenge, both on and off the water.
What do you make of what you've seen of your rivals?
Yeah, Team New Zealand, as you'd expect, you know, they're well run, been at it a long time, got good people, good sailors. Their first boat I like, it's a good boat, good concept. Yeah, I mean, they're going to be incredibly tough to beat on home waters. The Italian, I think, you know, Prada have done a good job. You know, again, their boat, it's a good boat. I think they've been really innovative in a lot of their concepts, which is good. And they've got, you know, great sailors, and they've been at it a long time. So they've got their processes in place and so on. So I think they will be really strong actually. And the Americans, a bit like ourselves, kind of got the class rule a bit later. They're a new organisation, but I think from what I've seen, for a new organisation, okay, they've been doing 2P52s and mini maxes, and Terry's been running that. But I think actually, to their credit, they've done a really good job as a new team to build that up. And I don't know, but from what it looks like to me, they kind of met their deadlines in terms of build manufacturing, and that's often, as a new organisation, can often be really hard. So, and again, great sailors, great designers. So I think all the teams are going to be really strong. Well, they're all certainly on paper really strong teams. So it's going to be a real tight one, I think. But the big, I said again, this fact that no one will have really lined up properly, someone's going to have got to jump from somewhere, and then everyone else will be trying to catch up. And whether or not you can do that in time and surpass that, that'll be the key.
Yeah, you're going to have to be nimble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's talk about the Cup generally, Ben. I mean, it's obviously hugely important to you for a number of reasons. How important would it be for you personally if Sir Ben Ainslie's name went down in the Cup's incredible long history as the man that finally brought the Cup back to the British trophy cabinet?
Well, I mean, personally, yeah, it would be amazing, but it's obviously the team that does it. So to me, it's about, well, first and foremost, just getting that trophy back. Jamie Sheldon, who's a Commodore of the Yacht Squadron, who's just a great guy. It's been one of the actual many pluses of this is building a relationship with Jamie and his wife Susie. They're great fun, and the joy that I think for all of us to get that America's Cup back on that Yacht Squadron mantelpiece, that would be massive for British sailing and British sport, really. So I think that's not just personally, but I know the whole team, that's what motivates us to do this, because it is hard work, the Cup. I'm sure everyone's spoken to it. It sounds glamorous. It can be glamorous at times when you get to competition, but most of all, it's just bloody hard work, and you've got to really want to do it well. And the team here do. They work incredibly hard and they're motivated. So that's why we do it. Yeah.
But what about for you personally, Ben?
Yeah, it'd be the same. That's why I'm motivated to do it, because I want to get the America's Cup back on that mental-piece, and that would be, an amazing achievement for all of us, and I'd be part of that. So I'd be proud. It'd be another thing ticked off that list.
Does it frustrate you at all, Ben? I mean, we've seen ticker tape parades for England's rugby team, cricket teams, and in Australia when the Aussies won the Cup, of course, and in New Zealand. But it's hard to imagine that here in the UK. Despite the America's Cup being the trophy we gave away and have never won back, it's almost a living example of British sporting failure. So to win it would be a huge sporting and historical significance. How big an achievement do you think it would be perceived publicly?
I think it would be pretty massive. I think, like you say, when you look back to the history and the fact that we've never won it, never even come close to winning it, really. I think that's why people are a bit sort of subdued, maybe in the UK, towards the Cup. You look at other, as you mentioned, some of the other countries where they have won and it's been huge. I mean, look at Switzerland. No one ever thought Switzerland would have won the America's Cup. So I think we do have a very strong maritime presence. Obviously, it's an island nation. Our maritime history here in Portsmouth is the centre of that. So I think, if we can actually get the team to the point of looking like it's got half a chance of winning it, then I think we'll find that people will pay attention in a big way. And it would be one of those, you think back to cycling. Obviously, cycling is a much bigger sport, but that moment when it looked like, geez, Bradley Wiggins might actually win the Tour de France here. Wow. I mean, that was just a huge moment in British sport. And I think it would be, something similar to that.
Is there anything bigger in sailing and in our sport? Do you think there's anything you could achieve that would be more important to you than winning the America's Cup?
No. It's the history of the Cup. The fact it's the only thing really that we've never won in sailing, as far as I can think of. We've had amazing success offshore. People like Ellen MacArthur and now Alex Thompson going for the Vendée, and hopefully he can knock that one off. And way back, Robin Knox-Johnson, who's local here to Portsmouth, who I've got to know very well over the years, who's an amazing guy. And, all the way back for our maritime history, the Cup's the only thing. And it still staggers me when you think of the engineering talent, design talent, the sort of people who have the firepower and are passionate about backing sailing in the UK, and all of our amazing sailors that we've had over the years. It still astounds me that we've never been able to put it together. But you have to have the three key elements. You've got to have the money, you've got to have the right design, technical expertise, and you've got the right sailors. And for whatever reason, we've never been able to put all that together at once. But I think that finally we've got that, and we're building a team that can do. It's one thing to win it, but then it's to sustain that and to keep going. And that's, I think, you look at Team New Zealand, you really have to take your hat off to them, how they've managed to do that. Okay, they had that blip, and then Grant Dalton came in and managed to rebuild the team. So they've been in the Cup game now for almost 30 years, and that experience that you build up time after time, it's a little bit like our Olympic program, which is traditionally does very, very well because you build that know-how, you get the confidence. We know we can win this. This is a process, and that's what you're going to build up, what we're trying to build up with this team.
Ben, I started this podcast talking about when we first met. An awful lot has happened since then, hasn't it? I mean, you've achieved so much. As we sit here now in your America's Cup base, the black carbon AC75 outside, can you tell me, Ben, how has it changed you? How different are you now from that talented 14-year-old boy in the dinner queue?
Well, I've, like everybody else, you go through life experiences, and both through sailing and, well, on and off the water, things have changed, as they inevitably they do. I'm obviously not as shy as I once was, but I think probably still underlying is that passion for the sport and being on the water. And even these last 3 months, not being able to sail, like as for everybody else, being really frustrating. And I remember the first moment I take the boat across from Benbridge, which for those, it's about 5 miles on the other side across the Solent to the Isle of Wight. And just getting back out on that boat, that sensation of the water running under the boat and that sense of freedom that you get when you're in a boat, that's still the same as powerful for me as it was when I was 6 years old or whenever it was. So I'm really fortunate. I think I do genuinely love sailing, and I'll always sail. And so yeah, I think that's the key. Really, really lucky to be able to say that I can do that. That's genuinely my passion is my career and what I'm able to do.
Ben Ainslie, thank you. The passion and love of sailing by one of the most decorated sailors of all time. I do hope you've enjoyed our time with Ben. We've seen some real insights into his unprecedented career, but not just on the water. It's fascinating to hear what it takes to try and get a viable America's Cup team up and running. And in that endeavour, we do, of course, wish him all the very best. We'd love to hear from you, so please send us any feedback. It's all important in the podcast world, so please let me know what you think, write a review, and do please subscribe on whatever platform you're listening to us on. The podcast is, as ever, produced by Tim at Vertigo Films. A massive thanks to Tim for all his time and hard work bringing you these listens. And a big thanks to Ben and his team at INEOS Team UK for making it all happen. I also want to say a quick thanks to SailGP for letting us use some of their footage from Sydney in promoting the podcast, and to the wonderful Rick Tomlinson. Rick took those great pictures of Ben at London 2012 that you may have seen on my social media channels. So Rick, thanks so much for digging those out for us. So that's it from me until next time. Thank you so much for listening, and sail safe, everyone.
This is Castle One. Race officer speaking. Pressure coming here, pressure coming.
We're 1.5 below.
2 dives here, boys. We're looking at 10-5 and 42.
This is Castle One standing by. Out.